What really happens inside a racing cockpit during a crash? The impact and the resulting violence suffered by a driver due to the G-forces transferred to the cockpit all happen very fast, in just milliseconds. Even the driver has difficulty understanding exactly what happened. Here's a video showing how much violence occurs inside the cockpit. The car hits so hard the camera almost goes on the blink. Watch how far the driver's body moves. One way to measure the forces in a crash is sled testing. In the following video, the top portion shows how enough energy is transferred to the head and neck to cause a serious or fatal injury without a head restraint. The bottom portion demonstrates the same G-force, but the test dummy is wearing a head restraint. "15 minutes can save your life." We invite you to take the next 15 minutes and we'll show you how a proper cockpit safety system can help the driver walk away from a violent crash. Unfortunately, not all drivers walk away. Motorsport is more advanced than ever. The cars and safety equipment are far better and more high-tech than ever. Still, drivers and co-drivers are killed almost every week. Why? The answer? Too often, drivers do not take ownership of their own safety. This checklist presentation focuses on harness systems and head restraints to help improve cockpit safety. It is born from mistakes that we often see made in cockpits. We believe a quick review of this checklist by drivers and safety personnel will help prevent serious injuries and save lives. 3 types of cockpit restraints are needed. Securing the driver in the seat with a harness system is fundamental to cockpit safety. A properly installed harness system further requires a head restraint to secure the driver's head and neck. Head surrounds, or side nets, are needed to keep the spine in line inside impacts. Stop the pelvis. Stop the chest. Stop the neck. The pelvis is the strongest bone or hard part in the body. The pelvis is far stronger than the collarbone or neck. Stopping the pelvis reduces loads on the collarbone and neck. Lap belt mounting points. Lap belts are critical to the entire harness system. When you stop the pelvis, it helps stop the chest and the neck. To stop the pelvis, mounting point should be between -45 degrees and -80 degrees from horizontal. See the illustration. Lap belt mounting points. Lap belt should lie flat across the pelvic bone. When tight, the buckle should be 1 to 2 inches below your navel. Again, see the illustration. When lap belt mounting points are wrong, the more the pelvis moves, the greater the load on the chest and neck. If the pelvis does not sustain the load, ribs, abdomen, and organs are all at risk. The more the pelvis moves, the greater the risk of shoulder belts slipping off. Use a 6-point harness. All belts must work in concert to keep the spine in line and the driver firmly planted in the seat. A 6-point harness helps stop the motion of the pelvis and the lower body earlier in a crash. This helps stop the chest and the neck. Stop the pelvis, stop the chest, stop the neck. The illustration shows how a 6-point harness works in lay-down seats and upright seats. For FIA spec upright seats, a pre-cut hole is not recommended for 6-point belts. If use of a pre-cut hole is mandatory, install the belts so they do not pivot on the opening. What happens without a 6-point harness? The more the pelvis and lower body move in a crash, the greater the subsequent loads on the chest and neck. There's possible injury to the sternum or male organs in a crash with a single anti-submarine strap. The driver is more vulnerable to offset side impacts. His spine is not in line without two anti-submarine belts. Shoulder belt mounting points. Mounting the shoulder belts too high or too low is a common error. The optimum is minus 10 degrees from the top point of the shoulder, including the head restraint. Shoulder belts must be within minus 20 degrees from the top point of the shoulder, including the head restraint. See the illustration. When shoulder belts are mounted wrong, shoulder belts mounted too low can compress the spine, causing injuries. Belts can slip off when mounted too low due to elongation. The torso can slip under the shoulder belts when mounted too high. A head restraint will not work without secure shoulder belts. If the belts slip off, the head may move beyond the head surround or side nets. Get the shoulder belts right. Keep the mounting points as close as possible to the shoulders. If the belts must be mounted more than 18 inches from the shoulders, cross the tail straps. When wrapping, place the 3-bar adjuster close to the wrapping point and always add a locking loop. More best practices with safety harnesses. Keep a checklist of best practices for belts. When mounted, all belts should be as short as possible. Always mount the anchors in the direction of pull when in use. Shoulder belt adjusters should be low on the chest to prevent contact with the neck in an accident or interference with the legs of a head restraint. No part of a belt should rub against an opening in the seat. Replace the belts after a heavy impact. Advantages of 2-inch belts are snugger fit across the pelvis for better retention and possibly a better fit with a head restraint. For drivers more than 200 pounds or faster than 210 miles per hour, we recommend the strongest belts available, like Simpson Platinum 3-inch belts. Polyester belts perform best because of less elongation and more uniform elongation versus nylon belts. Priority checklist of best practices for belts. Mount the lap belts between minus 80 and minus 45 degrees. Lap belts should lie flat across the pelvis. The buckle should be 1 to 2 inches below the navel. Install a 6-point harness, or add 2 anti-submarine belts to create a 7-point harness. Mount the shoulder belts within minus 20 degrees from the top of the shoulder, including the head restraint. Keep the mounting points close to the shoulders. No hands? No hybrid? For decades, drivers who died of head injuries in crashes were thought to have hit the wall or some other object with their head and helmet. Then it became clear that basal skull fractures were often killing drivers. Once a harness system has been properly installed, drivers need a head restraint to prevent the head whip that leads to basal skull fractures. Stop the head in sudden stops. Top speed does not always determine vulnerability to a head or neck injury. Head whip is caused by the sudden change in velocity, also known as delta V. Sled tests at a delta V of 42 miles per hour confirmed neck tension exceeded the threshold for a fatal injury. The top photo shows a sled test at 42 miles an hour without a head restraint. Neck tension exceeds the threshold for a fatal injury. The bottom photo shows the same sled test at 42 miles an hour with a head restraint. The neck tension is far below the threshold for a fatal injury. The benefits to wearing a head and neck restraint. You're quickly back racing after repairs to the car. You're back at work Monday morning. You're far less likely to pay large hospital bills or worse. Repairs to the car are relatively easy. If you're not wearing a head restraint, when you don't have one, it's too late if you need one. Excuse number 1, I don't go fast enough. Excuse number 2, I need a new set of tires and can't afford one. Excuse number 3, he had one, but he left it on the truck. The seat, head surrounds, and head nets are crucial in side impacts. Head restraints work in frontal impacts and up to 30 degrees in offset impacts. Head surrounds and/or side nets protect the head and neck in oblique side impacts. Seats with integrated shoulder supports are needed for side impact protection. Side nets are proven protection. On the left, without a side net, the shoulder and pelvis control is insufficient. The head and neck are vulnerable. On the right, with a side net, the head, neck, shoulder, and pelvis are controlled. The driver is contained. Checklist for head restraints. Use an SFI or FIA certified head restraint. Comfort is the deciding factor. Follow all manufacturer instructions, especially tether use. Practice exiting the cockpit quickly while wearing all of your safety gear. Review procedures for exiting when the car is resting upside down. Inspect the head restraint after a crash for damage or send it to the manufacturer. Replace the tethers after a heavy impact. The belts go over the head restraint unless wearing sophisticated over-under belts. Know the head restraint's recertification date. Neck collars are not head restraints, but can be worn with one. Safety equipment, cars, tracks, and speeds all continue to change over time. To keep up with the latest information, always check with your trusted supplier. This is our first issue of 15 Minutes Can Save Your Life. We expect to update it occasionally as racing and safety standards evolve.